The night air above Whitechapel was sharp enough to taste, laced with the distant smell of rain and the quiet hum of late-night traffic. Elliot Graves stood alone near the rusted service grate behind the old textile factory, his backpack heavy with gear and his camera already recording. For months, he had teased this Halloween special to his viewers, the place no ghost hunter had ever filmed, the last sealed piece of Whitechapel history. But now that he was here, staring into the darkness below, even he couldn't ignore the uneasy stillness pressing in around him. This, he whispered into the mic, is where they say the city buried its ghosts. He lowered himself into the forgotten tunnel, its walls damp, bricks sweating with age, the air colder than anything above ground. His flashlight beam rippled across broken tiles, old railway scaffolding, and warning signs half-rotted off the wall. The space swallowed sound, turning each footstep into something too loud, too alone. At first, the only danger was physical. Loose stone, dropped oxygen levels, asbestos dust floating like ash. The kind of place urban explorers bragged about surviving. But about 20 minutes in, Elliot noticed something strange, an outline on the wall where brick color shifted, like something used to be there. A door. Not on the 1891 tunnel map. Not on the restoration reports. Not in any historical record he'd studied. A door that shouldn't exist. Its surface was iron, its hinges eaten with rust, and a single police seal, cracked and faded, clung to the center. Elliot's pulse quickened. This wasn't just abandoned infrastructure. This was sealed, intentionally, officially, and long ago. He filmed every second as he forced the door open. The hinges gave way with a groan that sounded almost alive. Inside was a small room. Dust lay on every surface like snowfall. An old desk, rotted filing drawers, a lantern that hadn't held a flame in over a century. But the strangest thing of all was not what decay had taken, but what it had spared. A single leather-bound folder, untouched by time. Elliot brushed away the dust and lifted the cover. Unresolved Murders continues beyond 1888. His breath caught. His camera kept rolling. This wasn't just a tunnel. This was evidence no historian ever admitted existed. And for the first time that night, Elliot Graves felt something colder than the underground air. The sensation that he was no longer alone down there. The victims who shouldn't exist, rewritten. Elliot's hands shook as he turned the first page of the folder. The paper was brittle, the ink faded to a brown that smelled faintly of iron and mildew. At first, it looked like a simple case summary, the usual sketches of Whitechapel alleys, lamp posts, and narrow stairwells. But as he flipped through more sheets, a pattern emerged, one so precise it made the blood in his veins run cold. Each entry detailed a murder, and each matched the infamous signature of Jack the Ripper. Throat slashed, abdominal mutilations, body positioned carefully. But the dates, they didn't make sense. 1888? Yes, but then 1912. 1939, 1966. 1994. Each decades apart, yet identical, as if the same hand had returned to carve history over and over. Elliot felt his stomach tighten. He leaned closer, reading the final page, and froze. 2023. Victim, Elliot Graves. A bead of sweat slid down his temple, and his flashlight flickered across the folder. His breath caught, heavy and uneven. Was it a prank? A prediction? Or something far darker? A threat meant just for him? He swallowed, trying to steady himself, but the words swam before his eyes, impossible and yet staring him in the face. A creak echoed somewhere in the tunnel behind him. Elliot whipped around, flashlight slicing the darkness. Nothing, just the dripping of water and the echo of his own heartbeat. He laughed nervously, but it came out hollow. And then, in the shadow of the far wall, he saw her. A woman. Victorian dress, pale face, dark, hollow eyes. She stood motionless, watching him. Her posture was rigid, unnatural. The air around her seemed colder, as if the very tunnel recoiled. Elliot froze, caught between curiosity and terror. He couldn't tell if she was real, a hallucination, or something worse. The flashlight trembled in his hands as he raised it. The woman didn't move, didn't blink, didn't speak. Only stared. And in that frozen gaze, Elliot felt it. An unspoken warning. A silent accusation. A truth he wasn't ready to face. Then, a sound, footsteps behind him, closer than they should be. Yet when he turned fully, The tunnel behind him remained empty. He swallowed hard, heart hammering. Somewhere deep in the darkness, the words of the folder whispered to him, carried in the cold, damp air. It continues, and you are next. The dead who warn, rewritten. Elliot's pulse pounded in his ears as he watched the woman in the Victorian dress. Her eyes weren't empty, they were pleading. And then, almost imperceptibly, her lips moved. Leave now. He froze. The words weren't spoken aloud, but he felt them echo in his mind, a chill that crawled along his spine. Leave now. It was a warning he didn't want to heed, yet something in the still air pressed him forward, as if the tunnel itself demanded obedience. Then, from the shadows, other figures began to emerge. At first, he thought they were tricks of his flashlight, distorted shapes cast by broken bricks. But as he blinked, they coalesced into women in Victorian attire, each pale and spectral. And each bore the same gruesome scars, slashes across their throats, marks on their torsos, signs unmistakably echoing the Ripper's signature. They didn't attack. They didn't move toward him. Instead, their ghostly fingers pointed deeper into the tunnel, toward a wall where bricks were uneven, discolored, and worn from age. Elliot's throat tightened, a mix of fear and morbid curiosity compelling him forward. Step by step, he approached the wall, flashlight trembling in his grip. Every footfall echoed unnaturally, bouncing back like whispers of the dead. He could feel the weight of unseen eyes on his back, the chill of cold breaths against his neck. He ran his hands along the rough bricks, feeling for the irregularity the apparitions had indicated. One brick gave slightly under pressure. His heart hammered. With a soft grunt, he began prying at it. Dust erupted into the air, and the smell of decay hit his nose. Behind the displaced brick, hidden for over a century, lay a cavity. And inside it, a knife, its blade dark with rust and what looked like old, dried blood. It was wrapped in tattered, ritualistic cloth, frayed at the edges, but carefully preserved. The air around it seemed almost alive, vibrating with the weight of unspeakable histories. Elliot's fingers hovered above it, hesitant. The flashlight's beam caught the edges of the cloth, glinting in the dim light, and for the briefest moment, he imagined the ghostly women whispering closer, urging him to step back. But curiosity, reckless and irresistible, overrode fear. He reached in. The knife that remembers, rewritten. Elliot emerged from the tunnel, the stale air of the underground replaced by the damp chill of the London night. His flashlight's beam wavered in his shaking hands, illuminating the streets empty and eerily quiet. He carried the knife carefully, wrapped in the ancient cloth, almost afraid to touch it directly. Yet the moment his fingers brushed the frayed fabric, a cold prickle shot up his arm, a jolt that left him gasping. Back in his small, cluttered apartment, Elliot set the knife on his desk, staring at it as though it might suddenly leap and slice him without warning. He called Zara, his editor and closest friend, on video chat. Her face appeared, pale under the glow of her desk lamp. "This is insane," she said, voice low, tension creeping into every word. "That thing isn't just old metal. I've read the legends. The Whitechapel Blade. It's tied to the murders. People say whoever holds it becomes someone else. Possessed. Changed." Elliot laughed nervously, though it sounded hollow. "It's just a knife, Zara. It's history. That's all. I want to film this, show it to my viewers. It's the ultimate Halloween special." Zara shook her head, eyes wide. "You don't understand. Legends aside, this isn't just folklore. That blade, it remembers. It carries the memories of whoever's touched it before. People say you can see flashes, see what the killer saw." Elliot scoffed, but when his fingers grazed the cloth again, his breath hitched. Suddenly, the room seemed to warp. Shadows twisted unnaturally along the walls. And then, the vision hit him like a fist. An alleyway. Dim gaslights flickered in the fog. A scream ripped through the night. A woman ran, desperate, her eyes wide with terror. And there, behind her, a figure raised the knife. Elliot froze. The figure's hands, his hands, but the face, it wasn't his own. It was a man from another century, Victorian, cruel, and utterly still in its resolve. Elliot stumbled backward, tripping over a chair. The vision vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving the knife on the desk, silent and inert. His heart raced, sweat dampening his palms. Then, Almost impossibly, he felt it, the faintest pressure at the back of his mind, a whispering certainty that this wasn't a memory of the past. It was a glimpse of what he might become. The last thing he saw before shoving the knife into a locked drawer was the woman in the vision turning. And it was him holding the blade. The bloodline reveal, rewritten. Elliot spent the next morning sifting through public records, census data, and digital archives, his hands trembling with a mixture of fear and obsession. Each document he pulled up seemed to carry a faint weight, as if the centuries-old shadows of Whitechapel were watching over him. Names, dates, addresses. It was tedious, dry work on paper, but the moment Zara uncovered the connection, the world tilted. "Elliot, sit down," she said, voice tight as she pulled up a scanned police ledger from 1888. Her fingers shook slightly as she traced a line in the document. "Arthur Graves, one of the original suspects. He's your great-great-grandfather." Elliot's mind froze. He stared at the screen as though looking at a ghost. Arthur Graves. His own blood. The same last name, the same lineage. The thought twisted in his gut, a cold, tightening coil. That's impossible. I mean, Arthur Graves? That was over 100 years ago. Zara leaned closer. I double-checked the genealogy records. Birth certificates, family trees, it all lines up. And the DNA archive at the museum. "Elliot, your DNA matches the Graves lineage directly." Elliot backed away from the laptop, shaking his head. "I'm not. I can't be part of that. That's insane." But the doubt, the flickering anxiety in his own chest, whispered that she was telling the truth. That night, sleep brought no relief. Elliot awoke in the dark hours, his body heavy and unresponsive at first. When he finally stirred, he realized with a shiver that he was clutching something. The knife. The Whitechapel Blade. Its edges pressed into his palm as if it had a life of its own. He hadn't touched it since locking it away in the drawer. He blinked, heart hammering. The shadows of his apartment stretched unnaturally across the walls, and he could hear faint whispers, indistinct and teasing at the edge of his hearing. Panic rose, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being guided, or commanded, toward some unthinkable act. Zara, knocking urgently at his door, found him in the living room moments later, standing, eyes glazed, holding the knife as though it belonged there, as though it had always been a part of him. The killings begin again, rewritten. The next morning, London's news feeds were alive with shocking headlines. Mutilated body found in Whitechapel. Ripper's signature? Elliot froze, his coffee cup slipping from his hands and clattering to the floor. The body had been discovered just blocks from the very tunnel he had explored. Every detail, every cut and wound described in the report mirrored the grotesque patterns from 1888 with impossible precision. He sank into a chair, trying to rationalize it. It's a copycat, he told himself, though the thought offered no comfort. Copycats didn't predict the exact historical mutilation patterns to the letter. Copycats didn't choose locations that mirrored century-old crime scenes down to the cobblestones and lamp posts. Then it hit him. The time of death listed by the police matched the hour he had been found sleepwalking the night before, wandering his apartment holding the blade as if guided by some unseen force. A shiver ran through him. The connection was undeniable and terrifying. Elliot's phone vibrated with a notification. CCTV footage released to the media. He hesitated, then clicked the link, dread clawing at his chest. Frame by frame, he watched the grainy video feed. A man walking into the crime alley. The height, the build, the movements, it was him. But the clothing, the long coat, waistcoat, and stiff Victorian collar, was not his own. The image flickered like static, blending modern reality with the past. Every instinct screamed at him. That's not you. That can't be you. But deep down, he knew the truth. The figure in the footage moved with his familiarity, yet its presence felt alien, as though the centuries-old Ripper had borrowed his body, walking through time to continue a legacy he never wanted. Panic surged. He wanted to call Zara, to scream into the phone, but words stuck in his throat. The knife, the Whitechapel Blade, lay hidden back at his apartment, but its memory haunted him, a pulse at the edge of his consciousness, reminding him that nothing was under control. The alley was quiet again in the video. And then, almost as if on purpose, the grainy footage paused. The man's face, Elliot's face, shifted for a heartbeat into a Victorian stranger, eyes cold and predatory. Then the feed went black. The possession nobody sees, rewritten. Elliot tried to cling to reason. He pored over every CCTV frame, every news clip, every photograph. Nothing added up. Everything pointed to him, yet he couldn't remember committing a crime. The feeling was suffocating, a trap of his own mind. Even his friends began to notice. Zara tried to reassure him, but the strain in her voice betrayed her fear. "Elliot, I don't know what's happening," she whispered during a late-night call. "You're in every piece of evidence, and yet you swear you're not." He paced his apartment, flashlight in hand, staring at the walls as if they would offer some explanation. Then he caught it, on his own camera footage from the tunnels. At first, it was subtle, a shadow moving unnaturally, a hand reaching for a brick that shouldn't move. And then, horrifyingly, he saw himself. But it wasn't just him. His face flickered, like an old film reel skipping between eras. One moment, modern Elliot, exhausted and pale. The next, a man in Victorian attire, eyes hard and cold, expression unreadable. Each flicker burned the memory of the Ripper into his mind. Visions of alleyways, screaming women, and that same ritual knife. He slammed the laptop shut, his hands trembling uncontrollably. The knife was in the locked drawer, yet he felt its presence pressing against his consciousness, whispering commands he did not speak aloud. Then came the condensation. It formed slowly on the bathroom mirror, curling letters as if written by an unseen hand. Elliot froze, heart hammering. He stepped closer. The words were chilling, unmistakable. "He wakes through you." He spun around, half expecting to see someone standing behind him. Nothing. The apartment was silent, empty, yet the air felt heavy, almost sentient. A cold draft slipped around his neck like a warning. Every instinct screamed at him to run, yet his body remained rooted in place, trapped by disbelief, terror, and something far older than himself. Elliot stared at the mirror, the words etched into his mind, and realized a terrifying possibility. The possession had already begun, and nobody, not even him, could see it fully yet. The truth beneath the knife, rewritten. Elliot met the historian in a dim, musty library tucked away in a forgotten corner of London. Rows of towering shelves loomed over them, books heavy with dust and secrets. The man, an elderly scholar with thinning hair and sharp eyes, held the Whitechapel Blade gingerly in gloved hands, as if it might bite. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," the historian said, voice low, almost a whisper. "That knife, it's not just a weapon. It's a vessel, a ritual object forged in an occult ceremony designed for immortality." Elliot frowned, disbelief sharpening into dread. "Immortality? You mean like magic?" The historian shook his head. "No, more than magic. A soul tethered to an object. Whoever wields it becomes the vessel for the killer's spirit. The murders, the horror, it doesn't die. The soul leaps to the next person in the bloodline who touches the knife. The host forgets everything, and the curse continues until the ritual is complete." Elliot's stomach churned. He glanced at Zara, whose hands shook as she gripped her notebook. "You mean, the Ripper never stopped?" she whispered. "Yes," the historian said, eyes grave. "The killings continued, decades apart, perfectly mimicking the original murders. And the knife, it chooses the next host. Every time." A sudden chill slithered down Elliot's spine. The air around him thickened, as if the library itself held its breath. He instinctively reached for the knife on the table, only to stop mid-motion. His mind flashed again to those visions, the alleyways, the screams, the Victorian figure he had seen in his own reflection. When they returned to his apartment, the unease only intensified. The knife had been locked away, untouched, or so he thought. Zara gasped, stepping closer. "There's fresh blood," she whispered. Elliot followed her gaze. The edges of the blade glinted darkly, tiny crimson droplets clinging to the metal. His breath caught. "No one could have touched this," he stammered, panic rising. The realization struck him like a hammer. The knife was alive in a way he could not control. It was feeding, remembering, and marking its next host, and he was at the center of it all. The host takes over, rewritten. Elliot's apartment felt different the moment he returned from the historian. Shadows moved in impossible ways, corners stretched farther than they should, and the dull hum of the city outside sounded distorted, like a distant echo from another time. He tried to convince himself it was exhaustion, stress, paranoia, but nothing explained the voice he suddenly heard in his own tone, speaking words he didn't recognize, with a sharp, archaic Victorian accent. He grabbed the Whitechapel Blade, hoping destruction might end the nightmare. But as he swung it against the wall, the metal refused to bend, break, or even chip. It was immovable, unyielding, almost laughing at his attempts. The phone rang. Police. Another body had been found, and naturally, all leads pointed to him. As officers arrived, Elliot's voice continued to shift uncontrollably. He spoke in Victorian cadence, phrases that felt natural on his tongue, but utterly foreign to his mind. His reflection in the hallway mirror no longer matched the face he knew. It was elongated, hollowed, the eyes colder, sharper, older, an echo of the man whose life had ended in 1888, but whose evil had survived every generation. Frantic, he retreated to review his own camera footage from the tunnels. Frame by frame, he watched in horror as the Victorian visage overtook him, moving his body, wielding the knife with ease and purpose. Every movement was precise, deliberate, Ripper's signature killings rehearsed and perfected. Modern Elliot, the real him, faded into the background of his own life, a spectator trapped inside his own body. Then the final truth struck him with bone-crushing clarity. He wasn't just being possessed. He was no longer merely Elliot Graves. He was the Ripper. The ritual was complete. The soul of Jack the Ripper had claimed him entirely, using his body as the vessel. Every murder, every vision, every sleepless night had led to this moment. There was no undoing it, no witnesses to explain what was happening, just the cold certainty that history had found its modern host. And somewhere in the dark apartment, from a corner Elliot could not see, he could feel them watching. Silent, waiting, patient, knowing their plan had reached fruition. The murder that hasn't happened yet, rewritten. Elliot sat in the darkness of his apartment, the city lights outside casting long, shifting shadows across the walls. The Whitechapel Blade lay in his hands, its edges still slick with an unseen menace. He understood now. The name in the folder, the one he had once read with disbelief, wasn't a warning of his death. It was a decree. He was not the next victim. He was the next killer. A cold realization seeped into his bones, sharper than any winter wind in London. The curse did not end when a host died. It continued, leaping from bloodline to bloodline, hunting for the next vessel. Every life claimed, every murder committed, was preparation for the continuation of a legacy that spanned centuries. And now, the ritual was complete. He had become the Ripper. His hands tightened around the knife. He tried to resist, tried to deny it, but the Victorian presence within him stirred, patient and merciless. Every memory, every past horror he had witnessed, surged inside him, not as a vision, but as his own will. He was already the murderer. The next act was inevitable. Then he heard it, a soft, deliberate footstep behind him. The hairs on the back of his neck rose. The air shifted, thick and heavy, carrying the unmistakable presence of someone waiting. A voice whispered, low and terrifying, from the darkness just beyond the edge of his vision. Now, choose your next body. The camera on his tripod caught the moment in real time. Elliot froze, knife in hand, shadows twisting around him like smoke. The screen flickered, static crackling across the feed. Then, in a blink, the image changed. The folder opened on the screen, the pages flipping on their own. And there, in bold letters, a new name appeared. Zara Khan, 2024. The screen glitched violently, lights strobing across the walls of the apartment. A single scream, muffled and distorted, filled the room, and then silence. Outside, London's streets carried on, unaware that history was repeating itself in a modern guise, and that the ghost of Jack the Ripper had never truly left Whitechapel. It had simply found a new host.